My mother looked me straight in the eye at my 32nd birthday dinner and said, "Sweetheart, you need to be mature about this. Marcus and Diana have found something special together. This is a modern arrangement that works for everyone." The entire table of family members nodded in agreement as my husband Marcus reached across to hold my sister Diana's hand openly. My world shattered as I realized this wasn't a confession, but an intervention to make me accept their betrayal. 6 months before that devastating birthday dinner, I started noticing things that didn't quite add up. At first, they were small details that I brushed off as coincidences or my own paranoia. Marcus, my husband of 4 years, began working late more frequently than ever before. As a project manager for Harrison and Associates construction company, he'd always had demanding schedules. But suddenly, every project seemed to require evening meetings and weekend site visits. My sister Diana had moved back to town after her messy divorce from her ex-husband Kevin. She'd lost their house in the settlement and was struggling financially, or so she told everyone. As her older sister, I felt protective and wanted to help her get back on her feet. I encouraged Marcus to be supportive of her during this difficult time, never imagining I was essentially giving them permission to betray me. Diana started visiting our house more often, always during the day when I was at Mercy General Hospital working my shifts as a pediatric nurse. She claimed she was job hunting and found our house peaceful for online applications and phone interviews. Marcus would mention these visits casually, saying things like, "Diana stopped by today to use the computer," or, "Your sister was here when I got home for lunch." At the time, I appreciated that they were getting along well. Diana and Marcus had never been particularly close before, so their newfound friendship seemed like a positive development for our family dynamics. The first red flag appeared during a family barbecue at our parents' house in July. I was helping my mother Patricia in the kitchen when I glanced out the window and saw Marcus and Diana standing close together by the pool, engaged in what looked like an intimate conversation. Their body language was different somehow, more familiar than I remembered. When Diana laughed at something Marcus said, she placed her hand on his arm in a way that seemed too comfortable, too natural. When I rejoined them outside, they immediately stepped apart, and the conversation shifted to something mundane about pool maintenance. Diana's cheeks were flushed, and Marcus seemed unusually interested in his beer bottle, avoiding eye contact with me. I told myself I was overthinking things, that the stress from my demanding job was making me see problems where none existed. But then I started noticing other small inconsistencies. Diana knew Marcus's coffee preferences better than I expected her to. During family gatherings, she would prepare his drink exactly the way he liked it, with 2 sugars and a splash of cream, without asking. When I mentioned this seemed oddly specific, she laughed it off, saying she was just observant and trying to be a good hostess. Marcus began defending Diana in family discussions where he'd never shown much interest before. When our cousin Ashley criticized Diana's handling of her divorce, Marcus jumped to her defense with surprising passion, arguing that divorce was complicated and we shouldn't judge her choices. This was unusual because Marcus typically stayed out of family drama, preferring to focus on sports or work topics during gatherings. The discovery that really shook me happened during laundry day in August. I was sorting through Marcus's work clothes when I found a small silver earring tangled in one of his shirts. It was a delicate piece with a tiny pearl drop, definitely not mine. My jewelry tends toward practical studs suitable for hospital work, nothing as elegant as this earring. When I showed it to Marcus, he seemed genuinely puzzled and suggested it might have fallen off one of the female contractors at his job site. His explanation made sense at the time, but something about his reaction bothered me. He was too quick to provide a reasonable explanation, as if he'd prepared for this possibility. I put the earring in our junk drawer and forgot about it until the following week when I saw Diana wearing an identical earring during Sunday dinner at our parents' house. When I complimented her on them, she touched her ear self-consciously and said they were new, a gift from a friend. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. I was carrying the turkey platter from the kitchen to the dining room when I caught Marcus and Diana sharing a look across the table that made my blood run cold. It wasn't the casual glance of in-laws being polite to each other. It was the kind of intimate, knowing look that passes between lovers, full of secret understanding and barely contained affection. The look lasted only a few seconds, but it contained everything I'd been trying to ignore for months. The way Diana's eyes softened when she looked at Marcus, the slight smile that played at the corners of his mouth, the subtle nod of acknowledgement between them. In that moment, I knew with devastating certainty that my husband and my sister were having an affair. I set the turkey down with trembling hands and excused myself to the bathroom, where I splashed cold water on my face and tried to process what I'd witnessed. My reflection in the mirror looked pale and shocked, like someone who'd just received terrible news. Which, I realized, was exactly what had happened. The evidence had been accumulating for months, but I'd been too trusting, too naive, too invested in believing my marriage and family were secure to see the truth. When I returned to the dinner table, I watched them more carefully. Diana was animated and charming, entertaining everyone with stories from her job search. Marcus was attentive and supportive, offering encouragement about her prospects. To everyone else, they probably looked like caring family members supporting each other through difficult times. But now that I knew what to look for, I could see the undercurrent of attraction and complicity running beneath their public performance. That night, after we returned home, I confronted Marcus directly. We were getting ready for bed when I finally found the courage to voice my suspicions. "Is there something going on between you and Diana?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady and non-accusatory. His response was immediate and defensive. "What kind of question is that, Eliza? Diana is your sister. She's family. Of course I care about her, but not in whatever way you're implying." He turned away from me and began aggressively brushing his teeth, a clear signal that he considered the conversation over. But I pressed on. "I've noticed things, Marcus. The way you look at each other, how comfortable you are together, little things that don't add up. I'm not imagining this." Marcus spat out his toothpaste and faced me with an expression of hurt and frustration. "You're being paranoid, Eliza. Honestly, I think you need to talk to someone about these trust issues. Diana is going through a rough time, and I'm trying to be supportive because she's important to you. But if my kindness to your sister is going to be misinterpreted as something inappropriate, maybe I should just avoid her completely." His words stung because they made me question my own perceptions. Was I being paranoid? Was the stress of my job affecting my judgment? Marcus had never given me reason to doubt him before. He was attentive, loving, and committed to our marriage. We'd been trying to start a family, and he seemed as excited about that prospect as I was. Diana was equally convincing. When I carefully broached the subject with her during a coffee date the following week, I started by asking how she was adjusting to being around family more often after her divorce. She seemed genuinely grateful for everyone's support, especially Marcus's kindness and encouragement. "I know it might seem weird that Marcus and I have gotten closer," she said, stirring sugar into her latte. "But honestly, Eliza, having a brother-in-law who treats me with respect and doesn't judge me for my failed marriage has been really healing. Kevin was so critical and controlling. Marcus reminds me that not all men are like that." Her explanation was reasonable and even touching. I felt guilty for suspecting her of betraying me when she was clearly struggling to rebuild her life. She was my younger sister, someone I'd protected and cared for throughout our childhood. The idea that she would deliberately hurt me seemed impossible. But despite their reasonable explanations, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The evidence was subtle but persistent, like a constant low-level hum of wrongness that I couldn't ignore. Christmas morning provided the proof I'd been dreading to find. Marcus claimed to be going on a business trip to Portland the weekend before Christmas, something about finalizing a contract for a new municipal project. It was unusual timing, but the construction industry often had year-end deadlines that required last-minute travel. He kissed me goodbye Friday morning and promised to be back Sunday evening in time for our traditional Christmas movie marathon. Saturday afternoon, while cleaning out Marcus's jacket pockets before taking his clothes to the dry cleaner, I found a hotel receipt from the Riverside Inn. The dates matched his supposed Portland trip, but the location was local, only 20 minutes from our house. The receipt showed a 2-night stay for Mr. and Mrs. Walsh, with charges for champagne and room service. Walsh was Diana's married name from her divorce. She'd kept it temporarily while sorting out her legal documents and credit accounts. My hands shook as I stared at the receipt, understanding finally crystallizing into devastating clarity. They weren't even trying very hard to hide their affair. They were using Diana's name as if they were a legitimate couple. I called the hotel immediately, my heart pounding as I asked about the Walsh reservation. The cheerful desk clerk confirmed that Mr. and Mrs. Walsh had indeed stayed there, mentioning what a lovely couple they were, and how they'd requested their finest suite with a view of the river. She even commented on how romantic it was to see a couple so obviously in love. Sitting on our bedroom floor with the receipt in my hands, I finally accepted the truth I'd been avoiding for months. My husband of 4 years was having an affair with my sister, and they'd been carrying on right under my nose, using family gatherings and my work schedule to facilitate their betrayal. The coffee preferences, the intimate looks, the defensive behavior, Diana's convenient visits when I was at work, all of it made perfect sense now. The cruelest part was realizing how they'd manipulated my own kindness and trust. Every time I encouraged Marcus to be supportive of Diana, every time I invited her over for dinner or family gatherings, every time I defended their growing friendship to myself, I was unknowingly enabling their affair. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how long this had been going on, and how many other people might know the truth. The thought that I might be the only one unaware of their betrayal was almost more painful than the betrayal itself. I was a pediatric nurse, trained to spot subtle signs of distress and deception in children who couldn't articulate their pain. How had I been so blind to what was happening in my own home? The hotel receipt was the concrete proof I needed, but it also opened up a flood of new questions that kept me awake for days. If Marcus and Diana were bold enough to check into a local hotel using her name, what else might they be hiding? I realized I needed to approach this situation systematically, like the medical diagnoses I performed at work. I couldn't rely on emotions or assumptions. I needed facts. The decision to hire a private investigator wasn't easy. It felt like an admission that my marriage was truly over, and part of me still hoped I could be wrong about the extent of their betrayal. I found Agent Sarah Thompson through a referral from a colleague at the hospital whose divorce had required professional investigation services. Sarah specialized in matrimonial investigations and had excellent references from local attorneys. Our first meeting took place at a small coffee shop across town from the hospital. Sarah was a professional woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a straightforward manner that immediately put me at ease. She explained her process clearly and honestly, warning me that investigations often revealed more than clients expected to find. Most people think they want the truth, Sarah told me over coffee, but the truth can be complicated. Are you prepared for the possibility that this situation might be more extensive than you realize? I assured her that I needed to know everything, regardless of how painful it might be. We discussed her fees, which would strain my personal savings, but seemed necessary for my peace of mind. Sarah would pose as a freelance photographer, specializing in lifestyle and couples photography, giving her legitimate reasons to be in various locations where Marcus and Diana might appear together. The first batch of photographs arrived by secure email 2 weeks later, and they were devastating. Sarah had captured Marcus and Diana at Café Luna, an intimate bistro downtown, where Marcus had never taken me, despite my suggestions that we try it. The photos showed them holding hands across a small table, gazing into each other's eyes with obvious affection. Diana was wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, something much more elegant and expensive than her usual wardrobe. More photos showed them walking through Riverside Park, the same place where Marcus and I had gotten engaged 3 years earlier. Diana was wearing Marcus's jacket, and they were laughing together like longtime lovers, comfortable in each other's company. The casual intimacy in their body language was unmistakable and heartbreaking. But Sarah's most significant discovery wasn't photographic evidence of their affair. It was the financial irregularities she uncovered while conducting background research. As part of her standard investigation process, Sarah ran credit checks and examined public financial records for both Marcus and Diana. What she found raised red flags that went far beyond marital infidelity. Marcus had been withdrawing substantial amounts of cash from our joint savings account, amounts that far exceeded his claimed business expenses or personal spending. Over the past 6 months, he'd taken out nearly $15,000 in cash withdrawals, usually in amounts just under $3,000, to avoid triggering automatic bank reporting requirements. When I reviewed our bank statements with Sarah's help, I noticed that these withdrawals coincided with periods when Marcus claimed to be working overtime or traveling for business. He'd always been responsible with money, consulting with me about major purchases, and maintaining detailed records of his business expenses for tax purposes. This pattern of large, undocumented cash withdrawals was completely out of character and deeply suspicious. Even more concerning was Diana's financial picture. Despite claiming to be struggling financially after her divorce, she had recently opened 3 new bank accounts at different institutions. Public records showed she'd also established a limited liability company called Interior Design Solutions by Diana Walsh, which had been receiving regular payments from various construction companies in amounts ranging from $500 to $2,000. Sarah's investigation revealed that Diana's interior design business appeared to be mostly fictional. She had no professional design credentials, no portfolio of completed projects, and no legitimate client base. Yet according to business banking records that Sarah accessed through legal channels, the company had received over $25,000 in payments over the past 4 months. The pattern that emerged was deeply troubling. Marcus's cash withdrawals seemed to correspond with Diana's business deposits, suggesting some kind of money laundering operation. But the amounts involved were too large to be purely personal spending related to their affair. Something much more serious was happening. Sarah's most shocking discovery came when she researched the construction companies that were paying Diana's fake business. Several of them were subcontractors that worked regularly with Harrison and Associates, Marcus's employer. Cross-referencing the payment dates with Marcus's project schedules revealed that Diana's business was receiving payments during the exact timeframes when Marcus was managing specific construction projects. "I think your husband might be involved in some kind of kickback scheme," Sarah explained during our 3rd meeting, spreading financial documents across the table between us. "It looks like he's inflating material costs or approving fraudulent invoices, then splitting the proceeds with Diana through her fake business." The implications were staggering. Not only was Marcus cheating on me with my sister, but they were apparently running a criminal enterprise together. The affair wasn't just emotional betrayal, it was a partnership in fraud that could result in federal charges if discovered by authorities. Sarah recommended that we expand the investigation to include surveillance of Marcus's work activities and a deeper dive into his employer's financial practices. She also suggested that I consider contacting the FBI's white-collar crime division, as construction fraud involving municipal contracts could be a federal matter. I felt overwhelmed by the scope of what we'd uncovered. When I'd first suspected Marcus and Diana of having an affair, I'd imagined confronting them and demanding explanations. I'd thought about marriage counseling, separation, or divorce proceedings. I'd never considered the possibility that they were criminals whose activities could affect innocent people throughout our community. The personal betrayal was devastating enough, but realizing that Marcus had involved my sister in criminal activities made me furious in a way I'd never experienced before. Diana was vulnerable after her divorce, struggling financially and emotionally. Marcus had taken advantage of her situation not just for an affair, but to recruit her as an accomplice in fraud. I thought about all the municipal projects Marcus had managed over the years. Schools, parks, community centers, infrastructure improvements that were supposed to benefit working families and children in our city. If he was inflating costs and skimming money from those projects, he was literally stealing from taxpayers and potentially compromising the quality of public facilities that people depended on. The scope of their criminal partnership also explained some things that had puzzled me about their relationship. The expensive dinners at restaurants Marcus claimed were business meetings. Diana's suddenly improved wardrobe despite her supposed financial struggles. The way they seemed to have private conversations about topics they'd change when I entered the room. They weren't just having an affair, they were business partners planning and executing crimes together. As Sarah's investigation continued, we discovered that Marcus's fraudulent activities weren't limited to his work with Diana. He'd been submitting false expense reports for months, claiming reimbursement for meals, travel, and materials that were either inflated or completely fictional. He'd also been selling construction materials that were supposed to be used for city projects, then reporting them as damaged or lost. The financial evidence Sarah compiled painted a picture of systematic fraud that had been escalating over time. What might have started as small-scale cheating had grown into a significant criminal operation that was defrauding the city, Marcus's employer, and ultimately, the taxpayers who funded municipal construction projects. I realized that confronting Marcus and Diana privately wouldn't be sufficient anymore. Their crimes had victims beyond just me and my family. The children who played in parks built with substandard materials because Marcus skimmed money from the budget. The families who used community centers that might not meet safety standards because of cost-cutting fraud. All of them deserved justice. Sarah agreed to help me contact law enforcement, but she warned me that becoming a whistleblower in a criminal investigation would require significant courage and commitment. Once we involved the FBI, the situation would be out of my control, and the consequences for everyone involved could be severe. Looking at the photographs of Marcus and Diana together, and the financial documents that proved their criminal partnership, I realized I didn't have a choice. They'd made their decisions, and now they would have to face the consequences. My marriage was over, but I could still do something to protect other potential victims of their fraud. Armed with Sarah's evidence, I decided to approach my parents before involving law enforcement. I needed to know if Marcus and Diana's deception extended to our family, and I hoped my parents might provide emotional support when I finally confronted the full scope of the betrayal I'd discovered. The conversation with my parents took place on a cold Sunday afternoon in February, at their small ranch house on Maple Street. My father, Robert, was recovering from a heart attack he'd suffered the previous October, and my mother, Patricia, had been managing his care while dealing with mounting medical bills and insurance complications. I'd been sending them money when I could, but my nursing salary had limited capacity to help with his ongoing treatment costs. When I showed them the photographs Sarah had taken, my mother's reaction surprised me. Instead of shock or outrage, she broke down crying and said, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. We didn't know how to tell you." The admission hit me like a physical blow. "Tell me what?" I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. My father, looking older and frailer than I'd ever seen him, explained that Marcus had been giving them money for months. "He said it was to help with my medical bills," Robert said, his voice weak and ashamed. "We were drowning in debt, Eliza. The insurance only covered 60% of the surgery costs, and the medications were running us $300 a month even with Medicare." Patricia continued the story, her words tumbling out through tears. "Marcus came to us right after Dad's heart attack. He said you were worried sick about our finances, but that your nursing salary couldn't stretch to cover everything we needed. He offered to help, said he'd gotten a promotion and a bonus that made it possible for him to support family. The manipulation was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. Marcus had used my parents' medical crisis and financial vulnerability to create a cover story for his criminal activities, while simultaneously making himself appear generous and caring to my family. "How much money did he give you?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer would be devastating. Robert pulled out a small notebook where he'd been tracking the payments. $12,000 over the past 4 months, he said quietly. "We kept records because we wanted to pay him back when things got better." The amount corresponded almost exactly to Marcus's cash withdrawals from our joint account. He'd been stealing from our marriage savings, money we'd accumulated for the house down payment we'd been planning, and giving it to my parents while portraying himself as a generous son-in-law. But the financial manipulation was only part of their deception. Patricia revealed that Marcus had been telling them I was having emotional difficulties related to work stress, and that Diana was helping him keep an eye on me during the day when I was at the hospital. "He said you'd been having panic attacks and memory problems," my mother explained, wringing her hands. "Diana would call us every few days to report how you were doing, whether you seemed stable, if you were eating properly. Marcus said the doctors thought you might be developing early-onset depression or anxiety disorder." I felt sick, realizing how thoroughly Marcus had manipulated my entire family. He'd created a narrative where I was mentally unstable and needed supervision, which explained Diana's frequent presence at our house, and gave them a reason to spend time together while positioning themselves as my caregivers. "Did Diana tell you about spending time at our house?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand the scope of their coordination. Patricia nodded. "She said Marcus asked her to check on you during lunch breaks and afternoons when you seemed particularly stressed." She would make sure you were eating, help with housework, and call us if she was worried about your mental state. The revelation that Diana had been reporting fabricated concerns about my mental health to my parents while conducting an affair with my husband in my own home was almost too much to process. They'd created an elaborate fantasy where they were the responsible, caring family members protecting me from myself, while actually they were the source of the chaos and deception that was destroying my life. My father's health crisis had made the perfect cover for their scheme. Robert's heart attack had occurred in October, around the same time that Sarah's investigation suggested Marcus and Diana's affair had become more serious. Marcus had swooped in as the financial savior during my family's most vulnerable moment, creating gratitude and dependence that made questioning his motives seem ungrateful and paranoid. "There's something else," my mother said hesitantly. "Diana has been asking about your work schedule, when you have overnight shifts, which weekends you're working. She said Marcus was worried about leaving you alone too much, that he wanted to make sure someone was checking on you during your difficult periods." The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Diana hadn't been checking on my mental health during her visits to our house. She'd been using my work schedule to coordinate time alone with Marcus. My own family had been unknowingly facilitating their affair while believing they were helping to care for me during a mental health crisis. I showed my parents the financial evidence Sarah had compiled, explaining that Marcus's generous payments to them had come from criminal activities, not a promotion or bonus. The money he'd given them was stolen from municipal construction projects, funds that belonged to taxpayers and were intended for public infrastructure improvements. Robert's reaction was immediate and devastating. "You mean I've been living off stolen money while people in our community were cheated out of proper public facilities?" he asked, his face ashen. "Those parks where our grandchildren play? The community center where Mom does her physical therapy? Marcus was stealing money from those projects?" The moral implications of accepting money that came from defrauding their own community hit my parents hard. They'd been grateful for Marcus's help during a medical crisis, but learning that his generosity was actually theft from their neighbors and fellow taxpayers made them feel complicit in crimes against people they cared about. Patricia was especially upset about Diana's role in deceiving them about my mental health. She would call us crying sometimes, saying she was worried about you, that Marcus was doing his best but that marriage to someone with mental health issues was straining him terribly. We felt so sorry for both of them. I realized that Marcus and Diana had created a narrative where I was not only mentally unstable, but also burdensome to Marcus, making their affair seem almost justified as emotional relief from the stress of dealing with my fictional psychological problems. They'd painted themselves as martyrs caring for a difficult family member, rather than criminals betraying someone who loved and trusted them. The depth of the manipulation was staggering. They hadn't just hidden their affair and criminal activities, they'd actively recruited my family as unwitting accomplices by creating false narratives about my mental health and Marcus's financial success. My parents had been worried about me for months, based on Diana's fabricated reports, while I'd been working extra shifts at the hospital to earn money for their medical expenses that Marcus was already covering with stolen funds. As we talked through the timeline of events, another disturbing pattern emerged. Robert's heart attack had occurred during a particularly stressful period when Marcus had been asking him to help with various physical tasks around our house and yard. Marcus had told my father that I was too distracted by work stress to notice that household maintenance was being neglected, and that he was too busy with his promotion responsibilities to handle everything himself. Looking back, my parents realized that Marcus had been deliberately overwhelming my father with requests for help, knowing that Robert's pride would make him reluctant to admit that the physical labor was too much for his 72-year-old heart. The yard work, house repairs, and weekend projects that Marcus had presented as family bonding time had actually been calculated to stress my father's cardiovascular system. He knew Dad had been having chest pains, my mother said with dawning horror. We mentioned it during Sunday dinner, and Marcus immediately suggested all those projects that needed doing around your house. He said physical activity would be good for Dad's heart health, that staying active was better than sitting around worrying about medical bills. The realization that Marcus might have deliberately triggered my father's heart attack as part of his broader manipulation scheme was almost impossible to comprehend. But it explained how he'd been so perfectly positioned to offer financial help immediately after the medical crisis, and why his assistance had seemed so generous and well-timed. Marcus hadn't just taken advantage of my family's vulnerability. He'd created that vulnerability by orchestrating the circumstances that led to my father's heart attack. He then used the resulting medical emergency and financial crisis to establish himself as an indispensable family savior, providing cover for his criminal activities, while simultaneously isolating me through false narratives about my mental health. My parents were devastated to understand how they'd been manipulated, but they were also determined to make things right. Robert immediately wrote a check for the full $12,000 Marcus had given them, even though accepting it back would leave them in the same financial crisis they'd been facing after his heart attack. "We can't keep money that was stolen from our community," he said firmly. "People we know and care about were cheated because of what Marcus did. We'll figure out another way to handle the medical bills." Their moral clarity helped me understand what I needed to do next. This wasn't just about my marriage or even my family anymore. Marcus and Diana's crimes had affected an entire community, and keeping quiet to protect my personal privacy would make me complicit in their ongoing deception. After discovering the full scope of Marcus and Diana's criminal partnership and its impact on my family, I knew that simply confronting them or filing for divorce wouldn't be sufficient. Too many people had been hurt by their fraud, and they needed to face legal consequences for their actions. But I also realized that gathering evidence and building a criminal case would require more sophisticated help than Sarah Thompson could provide as a private investigator. When I contacted Agent Sarah Thompson to discuss the next steps, she revealed something that completely changed the trajectory of our investigation. Sarah wasn't just a private investigator specializing in matrimonial cases. She was FBI Agent Sarah Thompson, working undercover as part of a federal task force, investigating construction fraud in municipal contracts throughout our region. "I've been investigating Harrison and Associates for 8 months, Agent Thompson explained during a secure meeting at the FBI field office downtown. "Your husband's company has been on our radar because of suspicious bidding patterns and cost overruns on city projects. When you contacted me about investigating Marcus, it seemed too coincidental to ignore. The FBI had been building a case against Harrison and Associates based on tips from other construction workers and financial irregularities identified by city auditors. Marcus's name had appeared in their investigation as a project manager whose budgets consistently came in over estimates, but they hadn't had enough evidence to establish individual criminal liability. Your evidence changes everything," Agent Thompson continued. "The financial records you've provided, combined with what we've already gathered about the company's practices, gives us enough to pursue federal charges against Marcus and potentially his supervisors at Harrison and Associates." Agent Thompson introduced me to Agent Rodriguez, a specialist in financial crimes who would coordinate the investigation of Marcus and Diana's money laundering operation. Agent Rodriguez explained that construction fraud cases often involved extensive criminal networks, and that exposing one fraudulent employee frequently led to discovering much larger schemes. "The amounts your husband and sister have been stealing suggest this isn't amateur-level fraud," Agent Rodriguez told me. "Diana's fake business and the sophisticated way they've been laundering money indicates they're either getting professional advice or they're part of a larger criminal organization." The FBI's investigation had already identified suspicious relationships between Harrison and Associates and several subcontractors who consistently won bids despite submitting higher estimates than their competitors. The payments Diana's fake business had been receiving came from some of these same subcontractors, suggesting that Marcus was facilitating a kickback scheme that extended far beyond his personal theft. Working with federal agents to build a criminal case was both empowering and terrifying. I felt vindicated that my suspicions had been correct, and that Marcus and Diana would face appropriate consequences for their actions. But I also realized that testifying in a federal fraud case would require me to relive the most painful period of my life in very public and detailed ways. Agent Thompson and Agent Rodriguez developed a plan to use my upcoming 32nd birthday as an opportunity to gather recorded confessions from Marcus and Diana. They would pose as waiters at whatever restaurant Marcus chose for the celebration, wearing concealed recording equipment and positioned to witness any admissions of criminal activity. But the plan required me to manipulate the situation in ways that felt morally complicated. I needed to convince my family to confront Marcus and Diana about their affair during the birthday dinner, creating enough emotional pressure to prompt them to reveal details about their financial crimes, while defending their relationship. The strategy required me to act increasingly unstable and suspicious in the weeks leading up to my birthday, making my family believe that I was on the verge of discovering the truth about Marcus and Diana's affair. They would feel compelled to stage an intervention to protect everyone involved, giving the FBI an opportunity to record whatever explanations Marcus and Diana provided. Agent Rodriguez coached me on specific questions to ask that might prompt admissions about financial arrangements, business partnerships, and the timeline of their criminal activities. The goal was to get them talking about money in ways that would establish their guilt on federal charges, not just adultery. You need to seem hurt and betrayed about the affair, but also confused about practical matters, Agent Rodriguez explained. Ask how Diana has been affording her new lifestyle, how Marcus has been able to be so generous with your parents, whether they've been planning this relationship financially, as well as emotionally. The weeks leading up to my birthday required me to give the performance of my life. I started leaving Marcus's financial documents out where Diana might see them during her visits, with handwritten notes in the margins questioning specific expenses and deposits. I mentioned to my mother that I was concerned about Marcus's work stress and whether he might be involved in something he couldn't tell me about. I also began acting more suspicious about Diana's frequent visits, asking pointed questions about her job search progress, and expressing surprise that she could afford new clothes and dinners out while supposedly struggling financially. I wanted my family to believe that I was connecting dots without quite understanding what they meant. The most difficult part of the deception was continuing to live with Marcus, while knowing what I knew about his criminal activities and affair. He remained affectionate and attentive, discussing plans for starting a family and talking about future vacations we might take once his current project was completed. His ability to maintain this facade while systematically betraying me confirmed that I was married to someone I'd never really known. Diana's behavior during this period was equally revealing. She continued calling my parents with false reports about my mental health, telling them I seemed increasingly paranoid and unstable. She suggested that Marcus was considering an intervention or professional counseling to help me cope with what she described as work-related stress and possible hormonal imbalances. 3 weeks before my birthday, I discovered another layer of their criminal activities that made the FBI investigation even more urgent. Agent Thompson's expanded surveillance revealed that Diana had been embezzling from our elderly Aunt Ruth's trust fund, which she managed as Ruth's power of attorney. Aunt Ruth was my father's sister, an 84-year-old widow who lived independently in a senior community, but needed help managing her finances due to mild cognitive decline. Diana had volunteered to take over Ruth's financial management after our uncle passed away 2 years earlier, and the family had been grateful for her willingness to handle such a complex responsibility. The FBI's financial investigation revealed that Diana had been systematically withdrawing money from Aunt Ruth's accounts, using it to fund her fake business and cover personal expenses while reporting to the family that Ruth's living costs had increased significantly. Diana had been stealing from an elderly woman who trusted her completely, adding elder abuse to the list of federal charges she would face. This changes the urgency of our timeline, Agent Thompson told me during our final planning meeting. Elder abuse is taken very seriously by federal prosecutors, and we need to stop Diana's access to your aunt's money immediately. Your birthday dinner needs to be our operation date, regardless of whether we have every piece of evidence we'd prefer to have. The plan for my birthday dinner was elaborate and carefully coordinated. Agent Thompson and Agent Rodriguez would pose as waiters at Rossetti's, the upscale Italian restaurant Marcus had chosen for the celebration. Additional FBI agents would be positioned throughout the restaurant as customers, providing backup and ensuring that Marcus and Diana couldn't escape if they attempted to leave when confronted. I would wear a concealed recording device provided by the FBI, and the agents posing as waiters would have professional-grade equipment capable of capturing conversations from across the dining room. The goal was to create a comprehensive record of whatever admissions Marcus and Diana made about their affair, their criminal activities, and their manipulation of my family. Agent Thompson prepared me for multiple scenarios, including the possibility that Marcus and Diana might deny everything, attempt to blame each other, or become aggressive when cornered. She assured me that the restaurant would be completely secure and that they would intervene immediately if I felt unsafe. Remember, you're not responsible for their choices, Agent Thompson told me, as we reviewed the final details. You're giving them an opportunity to be honest about what they've done, but whatever they say or don't say, We have enough evidence to pursue charges based on the financial crimes alone. The night before my birthday dinner, I lay awake thinking about how dramatically my life had changed since that Thanksgiving, when I'd first noticed the intimate look between Marcus and Diana. I'd gone from being a trusting wife worried about her marriage to being an FBI informant helping to expose a criminal conspiracy that had affected my entire community. Part of me felt guilty about the elaborate deception I was about to orchestrate. But then I thought about my father's heart attack, my Aunt Ruth's trust being violated, and all the community members who'd been cheated by Marcus's fraud. My personal pain was real and significant, but it was small compared to the broader harm that needed to be addressed. As I prepared for what would likely be the most dramatic and difficult evening of my life, I felt a strange sense of calm determination. For months, I'd been the victim of lies and manipulation, reacting to discoveries and trying to understand betrayals that had already occurred. Tomorrow night, for the first time since this nightmare began, I would be the one in control of the situation. My 32nd birthday dinner at Rossetti's began exactly as I'd orchestrated, but nothing could have prepared me for the emotional impact of watching my family deliver their carefully rehearsed intervention about accepting Marcus and Diana's betrayal as a modern arrangement. The restaurant was elegant and intimate, with soft lighting from crystal chandeliers casting warm shadows across white tablecloths and flickering candles. Marcus had chosen well. Rossetti's was exactly the kind of sophisticated venue where important family conversations might naturally occur. I noticed Agent Thompson and Agent Rodriguez stationed at the service counter, dressed in crisp waiter uniforms and blending seamlessly with the restaurant's professional staff. My parents arrived first, looking nervous and overdressed for the occasion. Patricia wore the navy blue dress she reserved for special occasions, while Robert had chosen his best suit despite still moving carefully due to his ongoing heart recovery. Diana arrived fashionably late, stunning in a black cocktail dress that I'd never seen before, but that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Marcus played the perfect attentive husband throughout dinner, ensuring my wine glass stayed full and steering conversation toward light topics, like upcoming family vacations and home renovation projects we'd supposedly been discussing. His performance was flawless, but knowing what I knew about his criminal activities and affair, watching him act loving and devoted felt like observing a sociopath demonstrate his manipulation skills. As dessert arrived, tiramisu with a single candle that Marcus had requested for my birthday celebration, the mood at our table shifted perceptibly. My family members exchanged meaningful glances, and I could see them gathering courage for the intervention they believed was necessary to protect everyone involved. Patricia was the one who finally spoke the words I'd been dreading and anticipating for weeks. She reached across the table to take my hand, her eyes filled with what looked like genuine compassion, and said, "Sweetheart, you need to be mature about this. Marcus and Diana have found something special together. This is a modern arrangement that works for everyone." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd known they were coming. Hearing my mother tell me to accept my husband's affair with my sister as a modern arrangement felt like the ultimate betrayal of everything I'd believed about family loyalty and moral standards. Robert cleared his throat and added, "Eliza, honey, we know this is hard to understand, but sometimes life brings people together in ways that don't fit traditional expectations. Marcus and Diana didn't plan for this to happen, but they've found happiness together, and we think the mature thing is to find a way for everyone to be part of this new family structure." Diana and Marcus held hands openly on top of the table, no longer hiding their physical affection. Diana spoke next, her voice soft and apologetic, but firm in her conviction. "Eliza, I know this seems shocking, but Marcus and I have something real and deep together. We never meant to hurt you, but we can't deny what we feel for each other. We hope you can find a way to be happy for us, and maybe even be part of this new arrangement." Marcus nodded earnestly and said, "Eliza, I still care about you deeply. You'll always be family to me, and we can figure out how to make this work for everyone. Diana and I are committed to each other, but that doesn't mean you have to be alone, or that we can't all be close." The rehearsed nature of their intervention was obvious, but what struck me most was their genuine belief that they were being reasonable and caring. They'd convinced themselves that their affair and criminal activities were justifiable, and that asking me to accept betrayal was actually an act of kindness that would prevent messier consequences. I played my part perfectly, acting devastated and confused while asking the specific questions Agent Rodriguez had coached me to pursue. "How long has this been going on?" I asked through tears that were partly genuine and partly performance. Diana answered first, looking relieved to finally be honest about the timeline. 8 months, she said. "It started as friendship while I was going through my divorce. But we realized we had feelings that went much deeper than family relationships usually do." Marcus jumped in with additional details that would be devastating evidence in their upcoming federal trial. "We tried to fight it, Eliza. We knew it would be complicated for the family. But when Diana's divorce was finalized, and she needed help getting back on her feet financially, spending time together just felt natural and right." His mention of helping Diana financially was exactly the opening Agent Rodriguez had prepared me to pursue. "What do you mean, helping her financially?" I asked, wiping my eyes with my napkin. I thought Diana was struggling to find work and get stable after her divorce. Diana's cheeks flushed, but she answered with surprising honesty. "Marcus has been incredibly generous, Eliza. He helped me start my interior design business, connected me with clients from his construction projects, even gave me some startup money when I couldn't afford proper business equipment." My mother added, "Marcus has been so thoughtful about taking care of family during difficult times. The way he helped us with Dad's medical bills, and how he's been supporting Diana's new business, shows what a caring person he is." Marcus beamed with pride at Patricia's praise, completely unaware that his generosity with stolen money was being recorded by federal agents positioned throughout the restaurant. "Family takes care of family," he said. "I've been blessed with some success at work lately, and it felt right to share that with people I care about." I pressed for more details about his work success, asking about the promotion and bonuses he'd claimed were funding his generosity. Marcus launched into an elaborate explanation about his increased responsibilities at Harrison & Associates, his management of larger municipal projects, and the performance bonuses he'd been earning for bringing projects in on time and under budget. "The city has been really impressed with my cost management," Marcus said proudly. "I've found ways to save money on materials and subcontractor fees that have resulted in significant bonuses for me and profits for the company. It's allowed me to take better care of everyone I love." His admission that he'd been manipulating city construction budgets was exactly what Agent Rodriguez needed for federal fraud charges. But Marcus wasn't finished incriminating himself. He continued explaining how his business success had created opportunities for Diana's interior design company. "Diana has such a natural eye for design," Marcus said, squeezing her hand affectionately. "I've been able to recommend her services to subcontractors who work on my projects. She's earned over $20,000 in just a few months because of referrals from my professional contacts." Diana nodded enthusiastically, apparently forgetting that her business was entirely fictitious and that the payments she'd received were kickbacks from Marcus's fraud scheme. "It's been amazing to have Marcus's support in building my career. The construction industry is so male-dominated, but having an advocate like Marcus has opened doors I never could have accessed on my own." As they continued explaining their financial arrangements and business partnership, I realized they'd created an elaborate fantasy where their criminal activities were legitimate business success and generous family support. They genuinely seemed to believe their own lies about Marcus's work performance and Diana's design business. My family members were nodding along approvingly, clearly impressed by Marcus's financial success and Diana's entrepreneurial achievements. They had no idea that every dollar Marcus had given them came from defrauding municipal construction projects, or that Diana's business income was payment for participating in money laundering. When I felt confident that we'd captured enough incriminating admissions to support federal charges, I gave Agent Thompson the subtle signal we'd arranged. I touched my earring and then placed both hands flat on the table, indicating that it was time for law enforcement to reveal themselves. Agent Thompson approached our table, carrying what appeared to be a wine list, but instead of offering drink recommendations, she spoke the words that changed everything. "FBI. Nobody move. Keep your hands visible and remain calm." The transformation in Marcus's face was immediate and devastating. The confident, generous family man disappeared instantly, replaced by a panicked criminal who realized he'd been caught in an elaborate trap. His skin drained of all color, his eyes widened with terror, and his mouth opened and closed soundlessly, as he processed what was happening. Diana's reaction was equally dramatic. She released Marcus's hand as if it had become burning hot and shrank back in her chair, looking around the restaurant for escape routes that didn't exist. Her carefully composed facade cracked completely, revealing the calculating criminal underneath the caring sister persona she'd maintained for months. Agent Rodriguez approached from the other side, accompanied by 2 additional agents who'd been positioned as customers throughout the evening. As they displayed their badges and began reading Miranda rights, Marcus finally found his voice and began babbling desperate explanations. "This is a misunderstanding," he said frantically. "We were just having a family dinner. Eliza, tell them this is just about our relationship issues. There's no need to involve law enforcement." But it was too late for explanations or damage control. The FBI had recorded detailed confessions about financial fraud, kickback schemes, and money laundering, delivered voluntarily by defendants who thought they were convincing me to accept their betrayal, rather than incriminating themselves in federal crimes. As handcuffs appeared and other restaurant patrons began staring at our table in shock and confusion, I felt a mixture of satisfaction, sadness, and relief that had been building for months. Finally reaching its resolution, Marcus and Diana had made their choices, and now they would face the consequences of their criminal activities and personal betrayals. The birthday dinner that was supposed to celebrate another year of my life had instead become the moment when justice finally caught up with the people who'd been systematically destroying my family and community through their greed and selfishness. As Agent Thompson and Agent Rodriguez moved to arrest Marcus and Diana, the carefully orchestrated facade that had sustained their affair and criminal partnership for 8 months collapsed spectacularly. The elegant dining room at Rossetti's transformed into a crime scene, with other patrons whispering and pointing while FBI agents efficiently secured evidence and witnesses. Marcus's immediate reaction was predictable and pathetic. As Agent Rodriguez began reading him his Miranda rights, he turned to Diana with desperate accusation in his voice. "This is your fault," he hissed. "I never would have gotten involved in financial fraud if you hadn't convinced me to help with your business. You seduced me into this whole scheme." Diana's response revealed the calculating criminal she'd hidden beneath her vulnerable sister persona for months. Instead of denying his accusations, she immediately began providing evidence of his criminal activities to the arresting agents. "He's lying," she told Agent Thompson, while handcuffs were being applied. "Marcus has been stealing from city construction projects since long before I got involved. He recruited me to help launder money through my fake business, but he was already embezzling when we met." Agent Rodriguez interrupted their mutual accusations to inform them that anything they said could be used as evidence against them, but neither seemed capable of remaining silent. The pressure of maintaining their deception for so long, combined with the shock of being caught, had triggered a compulsive need to shift blame and minimize their individual culpability. "I have documentation proving that Marcus transferred stolen money to offshore accounts in my name without my knowledge," Diana continued frantically. "He was planning to frame me for everything if we got caught. I can show you bank records, email communications, everything you need to prove he was the mastermind behind this operation." Marcus's face turned red with fury at Diana's betrayal. "You're the one who suggested expanding the fraud scheme," he shouted. "You said your divorce lawyer had given you ideas about hiding assets and creating fake businesses. You brought criminal expertise to what started as minor expense account padding." Their public breakdown provided Agent Rodriguez with additional evidence beyond what they'd captured during dinner conversation. The FBI agents allowed Marcus and Diana to continue incriminating themselves while documenting their statements as potential testimony for the prosecution. My family members sat frozen in shock as they watched the 2 people they'd believed were generous and caring reveal themselves as selfish criminals, willing to betray each other immediately when faced with consequences. My parents looked devastated as they realized how thoroughly they'd been manipulated during my father's medical crisis. Patricia started crying when she understood that the money Marcus had given them for Robert's heart medications had been stolen from municipal projects that were supposed to benefit families just like ours. "We accepted stolen money," she whispered. "People in our community were cheated because we took money that didn't belong to Marcus." Robert looked physically ill as he processed the implications of their financial assistance. "The community center where your mother does physical therapy, the park improvements in our neighborhood," Marcus was stealing money from those projects while pretending to help our family, he said weakly. As additional FBI agents arrived to transport Marcus and Diana to federal holding facilities, Agent Thompson revealed another shocking development that none of us had anticipated. She announced that Mr. Slesh and FBI, Harrison, Marcus's boss at Harrison and Associates, was also being arrested simultaneously at his home, along with 3 other employees who'd been part of the municipal fraud conspiracy. Your evidence helped us expose a criminal network that's been defrauding the city for over 2 years, Agent Thompson explained to me, while Marcus and Diana were being processed. The amounts stolen were much larger than what your husband and sister were directly involved in. They were small players in a major organized fraud scheme. The revelation that Marcus and Diana were part of a larger criminal organization explained some aspects of their operation that had seemed too sophisticated for amateur criminals. The offshore bank accounts, the elaborate money laundering through Diana's fake business, and the systematic nature of their municipal contract fraud had all been components of a well-established criminal enterprise. Agent Rodriguez provided additional details about the broader investigation, while my family tried to process everything they'd witnessed. Harrison and Associates has been submitting fraudulent bids on city contracts, using substandard materials, and inflating costs on projects throughout the region, he explained. Your husband was recruited to facilitate this fraud because of his project management position, but he became a willing participant who brought your sister into the scheme. The scope of the criminal network made Marcus and Diana's personal betrayals seem almost secondary to the broader harm they'd caused to our community. Families who used the parks, schools, and community facilities that had been built with compromised budgets had been victimized by their greed, even though they'd never know the specific individuals responsible for stealing from public projects. As the arrests proceeded, Agent Thompson revealed one final surprise that provided a deeply satisfying twist to the evening's revelations. She announced that our elderly Aunt Ruth had contacted the FBI months earlier, suspicious about Diana's handling of her financial affairs and concerned that money was being stolen from her trust fund. Mrs. Ruth Walsh has been working as a confidential informant for our investigation, Agent Thompson explained. Her reports about Diana's embezzlement from her accounts provided crucial early evidence of the money laundering operation. The revelation that 84-year-old Aunt Ruth had been secretly gathering evidence against Diana while pretending to have cognitive decline was the most satisfying surprise of the entire operation. Ruth had been playing her own undercover role, documenting Diana's theft while appearing to be a vulnerable elderly woman who didn't understand her financial situation. Agent Rodriguez showed us copies of detailed notes Ruth had been keeping about Diana's unauthorized withdrawals, forged signatures, and false reports about her living expenses. Ruth had been sharp and observant throughout the period when Diana believed she was successfully embezzling from a confused elderly woman. Your aunt was the one who initially contacted our white-collar crime division, Agent Thompson continued. She suspected that Diana's sudden wealth and new business ventures couldn't be legitimate given her supposed financial struggles after her divorce. Mrs. Walsh specifically asked us to investigate whether Diana might be using her power of attorney status to steal from her accounts. My parents were amazed to learn that Ruth had been actively working to expose Diana's crimes, while the rest of us were being manipulated by lies about generous family support and business success. Ruth's sharp wit and moral courage had provided the initial intelligence that led to uncovering the entire criminal network. As Marcus and Diana were finally escorted from the restaurant in handcuffs, they made last-ditch attempts to negotiate with the arresting agents. Marcus offered to provide evidence against Mr. Harrison and other employees at the construction company in exchange for reduced charges. Diana promised to cooperate fully with the investigation and return all stolen money if she could avoid federal prison. Agent Rodriguez informed them that cooperation decisions would be made by federal prosecutors, not FBI agents, and that their best opportunity to minimize sentences would be through their defense attorneys after charges were formally filed. The time for deals and negotiations had passed. They would face the full legal consequences of their criminal activities. Watching Marcus and Diana being taken away in federal custody provided a sense of closure and justice that I'd been needing for months. They'd made deliberate choices to betray personal relationships and commit crimes against our community, and now they would be held accountable for both the individual harm they'd caused to my family and the broader damage to public trust and municipal resources. As the restaurant staff began cleaning up and other patrons gradually returned to their own dinners, my family and I sat quietly processing everything we'd witnessed. The elegant birthday celebration that Marcus had planned as the setting for convincing me to accept his affair had instead become the scene where federal agents gathered the evidence needed to prosecute him for major financial crimes. Agent Thompson assured me that the FBI would handle all further investigative work and that my role as an informant was complete, unless prosecutors needed my testimony during trial proceedings. She thanked me for my courage in exposing the criminal network and emphasized that my actions had protected other potential victims from continued fraud. The immediate aftermath of the arrests felt surreal after months of building toward this confrontation. Marcus and Diana were gone, their deception was fully exposed, and my family finally understood the scope of manipulation we'd all experienced. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the sadness of realizing how completely I'd been betrayed by people I'd loved and trusted. 6 months after that dramatic birthday dinner at Rossetti's, the legal consequences for Marcus, Diana, and their criminal associates had been decided by federal courts, and my family had begun the difficult but necessary process of healing from the extensive manipulation we'd all experienced. Marcus received a sentence of 5 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to charges including wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to defraud municipal contracts, and tax evasion. The judge noted that his abuse of a position of trust as a municipal project manager and his recruitment of family members into criminal activities demonstrated a level of calculation that warranted significant incarceration. Diana was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for her roles in money laundering through her fictitious business and elder abuse related to stealing from Aunt Ruth's trust fund. Her cooperation with federal investigators, including providing evidence about the larger criminal network, resulted in a somewhat reduced sentence, but the judge emphasized that her exploitation of elderly family member was particularly serious. Mr. Harrison, Marcus's boss at Harrison and Associates, received the longest sentence of 10 years as the acknowledged ringleader of the municipal fraud conspiracy. Evidence revealed that he'd been systematically defrauding city contracts for over 3 years, recruiting employees like Marcus to facilitate theft from public construction projects while maintaining the appearance of legitimate business operations. The criminal trials provided complete vindication for my decision to work with federal investigators rather than simply confronting Marcus and Diana privately about their affair. Evidence presented in court showed that their fraud had affected over 40 municipal projects, resulting in substandard construction materials and safety compromises that could have endangered public welfare for years. All stolen money was recovered through asset forfeiture and returned to appropriate accounts, including the $12,000 Marcus had given to my parents and the money Diana had embezzled from Aunt Ruth's trust fund. The city used recovered funds to repair construction defects and complete projects that had been compromised by the fraud scheme. My parents insisted on repaying every dollar they'd accepted from Marcus, even though they were legally considered victims, rather than accomplices in the fraud scheme. Robert and Patricia sold their house on Maple Street and moved into a smaller apartment, using the equity to cover both the returned money and my father's ongoing medical expenses without relying on assistance from criminal activities. "We can't build our security on money that was stolen from our neighbors," Robert explained when I tried to convince them that downsizing wasn't necessary. "Every dollar Marcus gave us came from cheating families who deserve safe parks and properly built community centers. We need to know that our lives are funded honestly. Their moral clarity and willingness to sacrifice material comfort for ethical principles became an inspiration for our family's healing process." Patricia and Robert entered counseling to process the manipulation they'd experienced and develop better skills for recognizing deceptive behaviors in future relationships. The weekly family dinners we began hosting at Aunt Ruth's house became a foundation for rebuilding trust and communication based on honesty, rather than the blind loyalty that had made us vulnerable to Marcus's manipulation. Ruth's sharp wisdom and moral courage, revealed through her undercover work with the FBI, established her as our family's moral center and guide for future decisions. "Loyalty without honesty is worthless," Aunt Ruth told us during one of our early dinners together. Marcus convinced you all to be loyal to lies, which made you accomplices in betraying your own values. Real family loyalty means holding each other accountable for doing what's right. Ruth's experience as an FBI informant had energized her in ways that surprised everyone. Despite being 84 years old, she'd found purpose and excitement in gathering evidence against Diana's theft, and she encouraged me to pursue my own sense of justice and empowerment, rather than just focusing on recovery from betrayal. My divorce from Marcus was finalized quickly due to his criminal conviction and incarceration. I kept our house and used the settlement money to establish a support group for families affected by financial fraud, working in partnership with the FBI's Victim Services Program to help other families navigate the complex emotions and practical challenges that follow financial betrayals. The support group met weekly at Mercy General Hospital, where my colleagues provided meeting space and professional guidance for families dealing with the aftermath of investment scams, identity theft, and other financial crimes. My nursing background and personal experience with systematic deception helped me understand how financial manipulation affects families' emotional health, as well as their economic security. Working with other fraud victims taught me that my experience with Marcus and Diana, while personally devastating, was part of a much larger pattern of criminal behavior that affects thousands of families every year. Financial predators often target victims' trust and family loyalty, using emotional manipulation to facilitate theft and exploitation. One of the most rewarding aspects of the support group was helping family members recognize that being victimized by someone they trusted didn't reflect personal weakness or poor judgment. Marcus had been skilled at manipulation because he'd practiced these techniques professionally as part of an organized criminal network, not because my family was particularly gullible or naive. Through my work with fraud victims and my ongoing therapy to process the complex trauma of systematic betrayal, I developed a deeper understanding of how trust and loyalty can be rebuilt after devastating deception. The process required acknowledging that my marriage to Marcus had been based on lies from the beginning, while also recognizing that my capacity for trust and love remained intact despite being exploited. My nursing career expanded to include specialized training in recognizing signs of elder abuse and financial exploitation, inspired by Diana's theft from Aunt Ruth and the vulnerability of elderly patients I encountered at the hospital. I began giving presentations to community groups about protecting senior citizens from family members who might abuse positions of trust. The community impact of exposing the municipal fraud scheme extended far beyond my personal situation. City officials implemented new oversight procedures for construction contracts, requiring multiple approvals for budget modifications and regular audits of project managers' expense reports. The reforms were named the Walsh Accountability Standards, in recognition of Aunt Ruth's role in exposing the criminal network. 18 months after the arrests, I met Detective James Murphy, a local police officer specializing in financial crimes who attended one of my community presentations about recognizing fraud. James was divorced with 2 young daughters, and his understanding of how betrayal affects families created an immediate connection between us. Our relationship developed slowly and carefully, with both of us being deliberate about building trust through consistent honesty and shared values rather than romantic excitement or physical attraction alone. James understood that my experience with Marcus had created legitimate concerns about trusting partners with financial matters and personal loyalty. Trust isn't something you give someone, James told me during one of our early conversations about developing our relationship. Trust is something you build together through consistent actions over time. Anyone who asks you to trust them immediately is probably planning to exploit that trust. His perspective on trust as something earned through demonstrated reliability, rather than granted through emotional connection, helped me understand how I could protect myself while still being open to building a healthy relationship with someone worthy of my love and commitment. The deep life lesson that emerged from my experience with Marcus and Diana's betrayal centered on the difference between seeking justice and pursuing revenge. My decision to work with federal investigators rather than simply exposing their affair privately had been motivated by concern for other potential victims, not just anger at personal betrayal. True strength, I learned, isn't about avoiding pain or protecting yourself from all possible harm. True strength is about responding to betrayal and injustice in ways that protect others and create accountability for harmful actions. Seeking justice requires courage and moral clarity, but it ultimately contributes to building a safer and more trustworthy community for everyone. My family's healing process taught us that loyalty and love must be balanced, with critical thinking and moral responsibility. Supporting family members doesn't mean accepting destructive behavior or remaining silent about criminal activities. Real love sometimes requires holding people accountable for their choices, even when those consequences are painful. As I reflect on the journey from discovering Marcus's affair to watching him be sentenced for federal crimes, I recognize that the experience changed me in ways that were ultimately positive, despite the pain involved. I developed strength, wisdom, and moral courage that I hadn't known I possessed, and I learned to value honesty and integrity over comfort and convenience. The birthday dinner that was supposed to celebrate another year of my life became instead the beginning of a completely new chapter based on truth rather than deception. Marcus and Diana's attempt to manipulate me into accepting their betrayal as a modern arrangement had backfired spectacularly, revealing their criminal activities and leading to justice for all their victims. Today, as I prepare dinner in the house that's now truly mine, surrounded by family relationships based on honest communication and shared values, I feel grateful for the courage that led me to seek truth rather than accepting lies. The pain of betrayal was real and significant, but it led to discoveries about my own strength and my community's resilience that I treasure more than the false security I'd lost. My story isn't just about surviving betrayal or recovering from trauma. It's about choosing justice over revenge, truth over comfort, and courage over convenience when faced with systematic deception and criminal behavior. These choices weren't easy, but they were right, and they created outcomes that protected other families from experiencing the manipulation and theft that had affected my own. If you've experienced betrayal or discovered that someone you trusted has been deceiving you, I hope my story provides encouragement that seeking truth and justice, even when it's difficult and painful, ultimately leads to outcomes that honor your values and protect others who might be vulnerable to similar harm. I'd love to hear about your own experiences with rebuilding trust after betrayal, or your thoughts about balancing family loyalty with moral responsibility. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and doing what you knew was right? How did you navigate that difficult decision? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength through difficult experiences, and share it with anyone who might benefit from knowing that justice and healing are possible, even after devastating betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to seek truth and the strength to choose justice when faced with your own difficult decisions.